Good morning, Las Vegas. It's Zandra Pollard with It's Where I Am. January. January is the Blue Heart Month. It is Slavery and Human Trafficking Awareness Month. Today, my guests are Shatona Nelson, Ivory Shields, and Louisa. Thank you all for being here. Shatona, you were here last month, and I thought it was so very important to have you back. I had no idea it was, Slavery and Human Trafficking Awareness Month, when I asked you to come on. But you were so fantastic with educating us. I had to have you back.
Always a pleasure.
Wow. So I was telling you ladies earlier that I had to really pull back on my family. I had no idea that I was so loose with my parenting, allowing my son to go to the park for, till after dark, taking his word that he is where he said he was going, you know. So I learned a lot. And I really appreciate you being on last month and inviting your colleagues here. So, Shatona, you were a victim of child sexual abuse, and so was Ivy. Um, Shatona, can you start by refreshing us about your story? And then, Ivy, we'd like to hear yours.
Yes. So when I was 11 years old, I was brutally attacked and left in a ditch. It would completely transform my life. It would transform how I would live my life, and ultimately, it would lead to the different things that I do in the community now. The trauma at that capacity definitely changes you. And for a really long time, actually took this from Louisa, I was surviving. And then one day I woke up and I was like, nah, it's time to thrive, right? Not a
Mhm.
victim. I'm going to help some people. So, yeah, that's a very small piece of it. But yeah, that's my story. It actually made 20 years. He tried to get probation in December and they denied him. So, yeah.
Wow.
Mhm.
Ivory,
Yes.
can you
Mhm.
please tell us your story?
Yes, thank you. So I did experience sexual trauma as a child, not with an adult, but with older cousins. And in that experience, I really did not have a clue how I didn't realize it impacted me until I was well into my 30s. I honestly had blocked it out of my mind, didn't even realize. That what happened was wrong. And again, like I said, I didn't realize that it impacted me until I began working in the hospital with patients as a therapist. And as I'm treating all of these thousands of patients, I'm seeing a common theme in folks who are showing up with these physical manifestations in their bodies. And that common theme was some form of childhood trauma, whether it was sexual, emotional neglect, physical abuse. These physical manifestations in the form of diseases and illnesses and viruses and cancers and heart attacks and strokes, these were results of unresolved childhood trauma. And this is really was the catalyst or the impetus for me going on my own healing journey.
I was reading the fundamental framework used around the world to combat human slavery and human trafficking is prosecution, protection, and prevention. And this show is so important to bring awareness, especially in the month of January. And Louisa, can you tell us what age groups are the most vulnerable and what gender?
Well, really, all age groups. No one is outside of the risk of being a victim of crimes of this nature. That's what we'll call them. And the statistics are 1 in 4 females, 1 in 8 males.
Oh, wow.
Really, the statistics are that high. And one of the things that's most interesting is the date of the event carries with you throughout your life. But most times, until you're an adult, maybe like age 18 to 24, the first time you're able to leave your family of origin and be on your own and striving for that independent life, many times that's the first time you feel comfortable enough to even share your story. Or sometimes what happens is you'll have your first sexual experience as a grown person, and then you'll be triggered, and a repressed memory that you've worked hard to compartmentalize for years of your life will come up, and you'll almost have like an out of mind or out of body experience known as disassociation.
Mm.
And so it really carries with you throughout the lifespan until you actually deal with it. And so, regardless of the age that it happens, at the immediate onset of this, we'll call this critical incident or traumatic event, your body goes through these stages of grief or stages of adjustment. Even if you're not able to communicate it or you're not able to thoroughly understand it, it's the shock, numbness, denial, and then it's the emotional outburst. And then it usually turns to some form of anger, and then it goes into disorganization, guilt, isolation, loneliness. And then what happens is, because of that, you feel depressed, and then you start to isolate. And then you have this period of forming new patterns to cope with what you've gone through. And if you're lucky enough to have a confidant or to have processed it in some way, even have journaled it out in a diary to somehow release everything you try to repress, but you don't want to forget because you think you might need to tell somebody sometime, or you sometimes get in a new relationship and the new relationship is good, and then you feel the need for whatever reason to communicate all this bad stuff that happened to you.
I was watching the Surviving Jeffrey Epstein.
Mhm.
I watched it a second time about a week ago. And what I discovered was, with them and with other cases, is that a lot of times the females are grooming. The teenage girls are a big ringleader for this type of thing. Is that accurate, or?
That
That's
is accurate.
that's accurate in all trafficking cases. I
Okay.
know we're talking about human trafficking, so I want to be very clear because a lot of it's what people don't know, and that's the problem with trafficking.
Right.
It's not just sex trafficking, it's any kind of work or anything that people are being forced to do. Doesn't matter if you're 5 or if you're elder. Elders are actually they're trafficked at a high rate now because of elderly abuse and the people and the caretakers that's coming into the home. So their money is being taken away and they're cleaning up, and you think this is someone's grandmother, they're cleaning their homes, and it's not. So I want to be clear, the reason we see it with, and this is not from, the therapist on here, no, this is from my experience and what I do on the federal level. What we're seeing is a pattern of vulnerable people. If you're a vulnerable woman like myself or anyone who's been sexually assaulted, you're going to go with a woman before you're going to go with a man. If you're an elderly person, you're going to go with someone, rather man or woman, that makes you comfortable. So I
Right.
don't want people to think that, oh, well, it's just the women or it's just the men or it's a targeted age group or that it's just for sex. No, it's for work. It's for anything, any kind of coercion, right? So they
Yeah,
do
I was telling my girlfriend, I said, well, dang, I guess the massage place we go to, that might be a sex
large powers.
trafficking
They're
place,
huge. Yeah,
because they're not speaking English. And, I was just like, oh, it's cheap and they do a good job.
Husband and wife duos, we've seen an increase in that in the past 2 years. I married this man. I thought he was charming. I loved him. And
Uh-huh.
then he had me hanging out with his friends. And I think we're going to brothels and we're doing all this stuff. And come to find out, my husband is trafficking me.
Oh, wow.
Mhm.
Mm.
So it looks different. So we all need to be aware it's not at all what you think it is. Trafficking is very deep. It looks different. Sometimes it's drugs, sometimes it's work, sometimes it's sex. So that's why you have to pay attention to your kids and to yourself so much as well too. You start out doing nice things for someone and they're giving you like $2 to do it, and before you know it, you're doing it everywhere. You're being trafficked. People know what they're doing. You need to understand all aspects of it.
So I have a question. What about the kids that are selling the candy? Is that trafficking? You know how they're trying to sell you the M&Ms and Snickers or whatever, the regular candy bars from the store, and they have this whole story about, you know, a football league and getting uniforms. That seems kind of suspicious to me. Have you heard anything about that?
That's more of a fraud thing. You do see a
Okay.
lot of kids doing that. But what we're seeing is with the kids who's they're entering the streets, they're selling you something. Generally, it's someone else watching out, and they're targeting. It's what it's called. They're looking to target someone for kidnapping per se. But trafficking doesn't always look like kidnapping. A trafficked person can be literally living at home and going during the day to a massage parlor and coming back at night. It just is very, very broad. And we need to keep saying it. Everyone needs to keep saying it's broad. It looks broad. It doesn't look one way. That's the only way that it'll stop. So with kids that are selling the candy, you should pay attention to your surroundings at all times. Man, woman, child, adult. If someone's saying or trying to give you something that doesn't feel right, you probably shouldn't take it, or you should probably just make sure you go away and change up your patterns. Like, listen, you cannot go to the same street corner every day at Saturday at 10 o'clock and buy candy from a little boy with candy bar and not expect that someone has learned that pattern.
Right, right.
And
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say one of the things to look for is, if you're talking about like domestic servants or like people who work in hotels or even people who might work at a grocery store or convenience stores, some of the small bodegas, is, if they say to you, oh, I'm working late tonight, or one of your friends says, oh, I could never leave this job. You look for the little subtle signs where someone becomes afraid to leave their position of
And
work.
that's what I wanted to ask you. What are some of the signs? What should we look out for in public? Like, how would we know if someone is being trafficked? Like, what is suspicious?
See,
There we
Ivory,
go.
I believe you're in Atlanta, right? The Atlanta area. I would love to hear your insights on anything that you've seen or any advice that you can offer, because that's one of the high trafficking areas.
Oh, yeah.
I have to be a 1,000% honest with you. I don't know all of the signs, but I will say the ones that you have mentioned, those are the ones that I'm familiar with. The massage parlors, the kids coming up to you, trying to sell you things, them being the lookouts. You even now have men who are following women home. They're getting very bold. So all of those things that you said, and even just to add to that, what I just said, there are men who are following women home. And to your point about the elderly, I'm seeing that as well. It's becoming much more prominent where elders are being taken advantage of, especially, like you said, with the women. The women coming in and coming in with the more nurturing and pleasant, attitude, pleasant energy, and they're taking advantage of the older people. And yeah, with Atlanta being the having the busiest airport with flights coming in and out, it
Okay.
is definitely a hub for slave and human trafficking.
Okay.
On
So,
constant.
Ivory, I find it very interesting that you are an actress, a
Thank you.
therapist, and you
Mhm.
also work in the community. And
Yes.
so, what is your community work?
Well, I have a lot of workshops. I go to schools and I speak to girls about confidence, about
Okay.
being able to speak up for themselves. I talk to them also about meditation and mindfulness on a very simple form, in a very elementary way, because meditation isn't always meditation can be journaling, meditation can be writing and reflecting and being by yourself and spending time with yourself. And the reason that I like to share this with young girls, because it empowers them. It helps them to get in touch with the strength and the power that's within themselves. And when girls are empowered, they're more inclined to speak up. They're more inclined to tell someone when when something is going on. Like, for example, with a lot of the sexual trauma with girls, it doesn't a lot of times it doesn't most of the time it doesn't really start with 0 to 100. With family members or with someone they know is usually the abuser, and it usually will start with some sort of inappropriate touching or some sort of inappropriate comment, and it just escalates over time.
Mm.
So if we can encourage girls and empower them, and educate them on how important their voices are, and even their intuition, because we're taught at a very young age to ignore our intuition, to ignore these inner voices that oftentimes keep us out of trouble, that are our guideposts, they're our navigators. And so that's the work that I do in the community. You know, women do have to be very mindful of their surroundings. I'm always someone who is going to go back to your intuition and doing that work on yourself on a day-to-day basis, getting in a routine of meditating, of listening to yourself, because a lot of times we can avoid situations. A lot of times you may make a completely different decision when you're listening to yourself, because your higher self has given you direction. Go the other way.
Amen.
Don't go out right now. Don't do that. And but when we're cut off from that, I find that we find ourselves in a lot of situations that could have been avoided.
Internal compass. I'm working on it right now.
Absolutely, 1,000%.
So how does occupational therapy relate to slavery and human sex trafficking?
That's such a great question. So most people don't know that the profession occupational therapy was birthed in mental health.
Oh,
So yeah, that's where our profession was birthed. Now, for me, as I said before, when I came on this journey of healing and realized that I was affected by sexual trauma as a child, I was working as a therapist in the hospital. So that's how my story is connected. And then the other piece of what I do as an occupational therapist is sex education, and talking and educating people on how to reintegrate sex into their lives after some sort of traumatic event. Typically, a traumatic physical event, whether they are a spinal cord injury, whether they've had a hip replacement, a knee replacement. But the thing that people have to remember about either whether it's occupational therapy or physical therapy, before I can connect with them on a physical level, I have to connect with them on a mental level first.
right.
So people kind of miss that when they think about occupational therapy. And as far as schooling goes and training goes, we took mental health classes and all of that stuff. So, but it's just most people don't know that that's a big chunk of what we do.
Oh, thank you for that.
Mhm.
And Louisa Eiler, um, the ladies were talking about the church, uh, but you've also worked with people who have had trauma in the Catholic Church. Is that correct? So, I mean, I
Yes.
don't think any church gets like a pass. I think they're all kind of messed up. You know what I mean? As far as
Religious.
demonizing sex,
Right.
school,
Whether it's whether
churches,
it's whether
and
it's
the home.
children in the church, whether it's males in the church, whether it's preachers' wives, whether it's
Right,
pastors' boyfriends of some progressive churches. I mean, no one is immune really,
right.
and so it's this idea that putting it all together as a relationship counselor and as a certified trauma specialist, many times when couples would come to me for counseling, saying that they've been married 30 years and they haven't had sex for 20 years, when you start to unveil all of those things and all of those reasons why not, I would say, 85% of the time is because it was a childhood sexual trauma or some form of trauma that they experienced that they're now trying to work through as an adult. And two, sometimes it's that body image awareness when you don't like yourself. And so you can't
Hmm.
give yourself to others. And so, there's just a lot of unwrapping to do of a sequence of events that have happened in someone's life, to kind of build them back up to being a whole person that's able to be that person in their actual environment where they're at and not reliving the past inside their head over and over.
Therapy is so important. There is no such thing as normalcy. Everyone needs therapy, period.
And even when you feel good, you should go because
Right.
We don't
you've
talk
got to
about
have this baseline. It's just like getting your oil changed, like every so many months, you should just go to get it out. And then it'll always keep running if you know what to do. Because therapy really, it equips you with invisible tools to live in this world.
Yes.
Louisa Eiler.
That's correct.
All right. So I wanted you to let us know what you are doing in terms of prevention and awareness.
Well, most of the work that I've done throughout my career has been for sexual health awareness and rape education and intimate partner violence or interpersonal violence. And that includes vicarious traumatization, because a lot of times,
Okay.
you know, when you tell your story and then you come to terms with it as being a victim, many times you have to retell that story many times to a prosecutor, to an attorney, to a lawyer, to a judge, then maybe to media, then maybe to someone who might be working with you in therapy. And over time, every time you tell that story, you're putting yourself right back in there until
Right.
you've sort of gotten it down to a document that's really facts. And there's, a huge school of work about converting your feelings into facts and being able to evaluate your own evidence. And it takes a long time to be able to do that. So, as an outpatient therapist, one of the things that I like to do over time with people who have been a victim is to help them to document that in their own way so that at some point they don't have to speak their story and be re traumatized unless they really want to and unless they feel like they're capable of doing it. Because it's sort of like that when you're having a bad day and you're okay and you're holding it all in, and then someone asks you, "Are you okay?" And then the walls come down. Because what happens is when you have a critical incident that happens in your life, maybe the first time you're, held against your will, or the first time you had to stay later at a place of work because someone was luring you into their web of, trafficking and human slavery and things of that nature. So what happens is that doesn't set right with you. But then over time, if you don't deal with it within like 30 to 60 days, that acute stress from that first time becomes sort of learned tolerance for it. And then you start to repress it and you start to deal with it. And then over time, it becomes a post traumatic stress disorder. And left untreated for years and years, then that can develop into a larger personality disorder. And so the work that I do is uncovering where in that process you sit and when it became vicarious traumatization. How long ago did you actually leave that situation? Because, for example, someone could have been a childhood victim, they could have not been involved in any type of human trafficking or slavery or anything of that nature for, say 10 to 15 years, but it's very much feeling like it just happened yesterday because of the way they keep getting re-traumatized every time someone new enters their life, every time they have to dig up those old wounds.
Hmm.
And so the work to separate the past from what's happening in your life right now, and that ability to have that real healthy boundary of, it's not affecting me anymore. This is the story about me. I don't need you to be sad for me. I just need you to know that it's a part of me, because you want to release yourself from that victim mentality, but you
Okay.
can't ever do that if everyone's feeling sorry for you.
Right. Okay. And then, so who knows the stat about how, about abuse and children? Like, I think someone was telling me every 1 in 4 um, are abused sexually. Is that
Yeah.
right? Or,
1 in 4 females and 1 in 8 males.
yes, thank you. Wow.
One of the most recent, another statistic too, is about reported 60 to 70% of women have reported experiencing some form of sexual childhood trauma. And that's just reported.
Right. Because a lot of times we hold it in. I am such a big advocate about journaling. Journaling is so important.
Journaling is critical. So if you're listening to this podcast and something's happening to you, and you may not yet be in a place where you feel safe enough that you could report it, or that you feel like you have a confidant, or you're maybe not ready yet to call that number to get help or to leave, find some way to document out what you're feeling and what's happening to you, because it's important that you remember that, because that's your grief and that's your pain, and you don't want anything to take away from your ability to deal with that when you're ready to deal with it. So Google it into a doc, type it into a note, put a password on it, password protected if you have a phone, write it on a napkin and hide it someplace, and save it for when you're ready. But if you have the ability to journal something out and document it and put it in a safe place, do that, because that's helpful, even if you're not ready to
Yeah,
leave or
okay, so
do
you're
something else.
talking more about like the facts to have those written down and available and ready for when you need them.
Some
And I
facts,
was
but even your some facts, but even your feelings.
right, right. So feelings are important, but like you said, getting those facts written down, just jotting down what time did it happen? What was I wearing? Who was it? You know what I mean? Who was it?
Hmm.
What they looked like or whatever.
Even little things like what you remember.
Okay. Just write it all down.
Mhm.
Whatever you're thinking, just write it down, right?
And it doesn't even have to be in sequential order, just random things that you remember. You got to catch those thoughts like butterflies while they're flying by because, you know, later in life, they're going to be the things that are going to set you free.
Sure, right.
To
Okay.
add to that, that's a great way to move the trauma energetically out of the body. Because when we experience those, when we have those traumatic experiences, that energy is it, and we're not able to respond authentically. So, meaning that if you're in a traumatic situation, you can't scream, you can't run, you can't get out of it. It's happening to you over and over again. The natural or normal response is to get away from that. And so you have to hold those things in, and that energy, that trauma has to go somewhere and crystallize in the body. And so doing the things like the journaling, the yoga, the meditation, the writing, the exercise, um, I've had clients go out and write things down and bury them.
Oh,
It's just a way to really get that energy out of your body.
wow.
I'm going
And
to stress something else too, because we have a issue in all communities, and this is what unites the communities of trauma. You don't know you're being traumatized, and the problem is we talk about the healing process.
mhm.
We talk about what do you do and all of that, but we don't talk enough about what it looks like.
True.
And we're running into a problem in all communities where we don't know what these things are. We don't know that we've been traumatized until we're in our 30s, or it's as small as the wrong type of touch on your arms. Trauma can be the words that's spoken to you. Someone can look at you and you can feel traumatized if you want to be honest. We have emotional, we have physical, we have mental aspects, and it's so important. Whoever's listening to this, this is the thing. It's time to begin educating ourselves on what trauma, trafficking, sexual assault, mental abuse, emotional abuse, spiritual abuse look like, because those things make us vulnerable, right? So if you grew up in a house like me, I have a religious family. My daddy's a preacher. So when you get touched by the cousin, you're probably not gonna go tell anybody because you hate yourself more than you hate your abuser. And it's time we start talking about stuff like that, right? The only way we heal this is if we know. Had a conversation with my little sister. I'm like 10 years older than my siblings, about trafficking. And she was like, what are you talking about? If they're not being forced to have sex, it's not trafficking. And I said, sit down, let me talk to you. See, because the thing about it is, even if it's not sexual assault, if you're working for $2 because you're scared someone's going to post about you on social media, that's trafficking. If it just is, it can look like social media. I'll post this if you don't do this for me. If you don't say this for me, then I'm going to take your money. Or they already have access over all your money because you're a married person. So you're being forced to clean up the house and do things sexually that maybe you don't want to do. So until we start talking about these things and saying what they are, when we say the word someone says to you, you're sitting around the table with a whole bunch of adults and they're talking about sex open and ridiculously, and you're a little bitty kid, you're traumatized. And until we start talking about what these things actually are, we're not going to stop trafficking. We're not going to stop sexual abuse. We're not going to stop any of molestation. None of those things are going away. Even the lesbian granddaughter who is ashamed because one, we've shamed her because she's decided to be lesbian in a spiritual home, but she's also getting touched by the uncle. So she's dealing with her feelings and with that. It's time for us to start acknowledging what trauma looks like across the board. It's not traditional. It's not black and white. You need to look it up. You need to know what it looks like. All of these things look like, or it doesn't matter if anyone's making it to therapy, because I can assure you, we have 50% more who are never going to get to therapy because they don't realize they're being traumatized. So they have heart conditions and migraines and
Right.
diabetes, and they don't
It
know
shows
those
up
things are
physically.
coming from the fact that you don't even realize you're a victim, because you
Mhm.
have to be a victim until you sit with it. And we don't talk about that enough. So if there's anything that anyone got out of this, Google is accessible, phones are accessible, friends are accessible. Let's, in 2022, all hold ourselves accountable for teaching someone what trauma is, not just human trafficking, but for actually acknowledging all areas of what trauma looks like, what victimhood looks like. Therefore, we can heal. And that's something we can all unite on, no matter creed, religion, or whatever.
And you can
Absolutely.
provide that information on trauma and what some of that stuff looks like without asking anyone to share their story. That's important too, because someone will share their story when they're ready to share it. They
Right.
need to internalize that first and come to that reconciliation that, oh, I was abused. I was held against my will. I was a victim of that. And so, but that's not for you to decide. They have to decide it.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate Shatona and Ivory, you guys, letting us know your personal story so that others can hear and know, or relate to, some of the things that you all have been through, and recognizing that they are, having the same experience. So, I mean, that's what the show is all about. It's about awareness, it's about resources, it's about getting help. Um, if you've missed anything that these wonderful women have said, you are absolutely able to go to my website, which is www.itswhereiam.com. You can find the show there and rewind it as many times as you need to and write down as much as you need to. Okay? Ladies, are there any final thoughts? Is there anything you want to make sure our listeners know? Any more information they need to know about yourself or slavery and human trafficking?
I would just say that the website ag.nv.gov, human trafficking, has a pretty robust website on some of the signs and some of the places to get help.
Okay.
So I certainly would suggest even just Googling simple human trafficking signs, symptoms, where to get help. And I think that that's something that anyone can do.
And I just want to piggyback on what Shatana was saying. It's time for us to really start having these conversations around trauma. And even to peel that back another layer, having the conversations about the energetic ramifications and helping people understand that the trauma and the effects of trauma not just affect the abuser or the survivor, it affects everyone.
Right.
It affects anyone within their vortex. One thing about the law of physics, one thing about it, every living thing on this planet is not immune to the law of physics, in particular, the law of cause and effect. So whatever seeds are being planted by abusers, you better believe that harvest will come back and it will affect them, whether it's them personally. So abusers may think that they have gotten off because they are not in jail, because their victim didn't tell on them. But you better believe that the law of cause and effect says that it will come back to you, and it may affect someone in your vortex. It may affect your offspring. It may affect your husband, your wife, your spouse, someone around you, someone in your vortex. So that energy will come back to you. And it's really important for us to start having conversations around sex and normalizing healthy conversations about sex in our community. Just this is in my closing. Um, to Shatana's point, in our culture, in our community, in the Black community, religion has really done a great job at programming us to not have these conversations, to shy away from these conversations. And
Yes.
I really think that there's value in us really taking a second look at how religion has shaped us and programmed us, and asking the question of is it serving us, and if so, how can it serve us better? Because I personally don't feel like we're in a better situation, and so we have to really be honest with ourselves and ask those questions.
Shatona?
Ooh, child, y'all got me in trauma mode. But as
Mhm.
everyone knows, by trade, I am a strategist. So for me, anything that I see, I want to create some type of strategy to get to a due point, right? That's the purpose in life. As much as I enjoyed that with politics and with business and things like that, we do not explore that enough on the other side of things, the things we can't see, our emotions and our mental health. So if there was anything that I would say in closing is it looks different for everybody. Healing looks different for everybody. Mental health looks different for everybody. Trauma looks different for everybody. What was traumatizing to one may not be for another. So, what I want you to do is listen to this and hear the words, but also understand if what you didn't hear could still be trauma. What you didn't hear could still be ways to help you. You can find me at Shatana J. Nelson everywhere on all social media, and shatananelson.com is my website, or defined as our PR, as most of you will probably know me more from that side of things. And if I can help you, reach out. You may not speak with me directly, but I can assure you someone from my team will reach back and they will help you. And again, I stress this so much. Educate yourselves on what it looks like and understand you will never hear everything you need to hear for your trauma and for your well-being. It is a self journey. It is self-built. It is catered directly to you and who you are. And I encourage everyone to find support. And if you can't find support, then make new support. Get you new friends if you can't have your family and friends and things like that. But life is meant to be connected, and you are not alone. Been there, done that, right? And we'll still be being there doing that. And all of us will be somewhere doing something at some point. So I encourage you to keep fighting and keep looking for strategic ways to come out of your dark places.
And the first strategic way is if someone tells you a story about their life, regardless of how obscure, unbelievable it may sound, the most important thing that you can do as a friend or family member is to believe them. And then you can educate yourself. You can go to humantraffickinghotline.org. If you're in a space where you can't make a phone call and you can only text and do transcription, you can text 233-733, and that will get you to the human trafficking hotline also. And just seek help when you feel it's ready, because you are the expert in your own situation. No one can tell you when it's safest to leave. No one can tell you when it's time to do what you need to do. So know that you are the expert in your own situation.
And if you can call, the phone number is 888-373-7888. And that is the National Human Trafficking Hotline, 888-373-7888.
Yes, you can find me on Instagram at I am Ivory Shields, and on Facebook, Ivory Shields.
Awesome. And you provide therapy still, right, to the public, or take a few clients?
I do a little bit of coaching, but I'm actually in the process of becoming a certified sexologist. So that will
That's right. You were telling me. Tell me more about this.
Yeah, so my belief is that the more that we can educate people about the actual, number one, energetic ramifications of sex and the energetic ramifications of the misuse and the abuse of that sexual energy, and the more that we can normalize conversations around sex, I believe that we can encourage people to speak up more, to call abusers to the carpet more, and more people will be inclined not to turn the other cheek and want to talk about this. The more that we can demystify sex and take the demonization out of it,
right,
we can start to have normal and healthy conversations around it and protect children.
Beautiful. Ladies, powerful show. Thank you all for being here. Sorry it started out a little bit rocky. You guys had me nervous today. I knew I had some strong women coming in here, bringing some great information. I thank you. I invite you to come again, and thank you for being on.
Good night, ladies. It was a pleasure.
Stay in touch, everybody.
Will do.
Yeah, always. Bye.
Bye.